Before I ever took my first breath, the world was already burning from a love it could never understand. My mother, Queen Elira, groomed from birth to be a crown, not a woman. Her smile was politics, her heart belonged to no one, until the war brought him to her court. King Zamanu, they called him the Beast of the South. But he didn't walk like a beast. He spoke in riddles and truth. He challenged her mind, not her throne. They met in secret, in gardens only moonlight dared to enter, and in that quiet, love bloomed. But the world does not forgive forbidden things, not when skin is different, not when blood threatens old thrones. In one moment, they made a promise with their hands, with their silence, with their eyes, and in doing so, they made me a child born of peace, but destined for war. They say royalty is born with a silver spoon, but I was born wrapped in silence and crimson silk. The night I arrived, the palace did not celebrate. There were no songs, no bells, just whispers. My mother, Queen Elira, held me close, and for a moment she didn't look like a queen. She looked like a girl who had risked everything for a heartbeat of love. But behind her stood the lords, pale, stone-eyed men who saw me not as a child, but as a threat, a stain, a scandal. One of them, General Varion, spoke what others dared not. If the court finds out, we lose the kingdom. My mother said nothing, just kissed my forehead and wept. That was her first betrayal, not choosing them or me, but silence. The night they came for me, the sky wept thunder. My mother had made her choice. She couldn't protect me, but someone else did. Baba Dogo, an old palace guard with more scars than medals. He wasn't noble, he wasn't rich, he was just loyal to her and to me. He took me under storm and sword, cradled in silk, running through a forest soaked in fear. Behind him, the soldiers rode like wolves, torches in hand, murder in their eyes. He didn't stop, not even when his foot bled, not when lightning cracked a tree in our path, not when he cried out in pain. I was just a baby, wrapped in scandal, but to him, I was worth dying for. That night, thunder tried to erase me, but one man's courage wrote my name into history. I was 16 the day I found it, hidden behind the last tile in the monastery wall. A letter, written in my mother's hand. My beloved daughter, if you are reading this, then the world has already tried to break you. She spoke of stolen meetings, of a warrior with fire in his eyes, and of a love that broke every law. My father, a name I had never been allowed to ask, was not a myth. He was Obazamanu, king of the southern flame, a legend in a land I had never seen. And I was not a servant's orphan. I was born of 2 crowns, a threat to them, a miracle to her. I remember my hands shaking, my breath caught between pages. They lied to me my whole life, raised me in silence, kept me small, hidden, powerless. But that day, I heard something new in my blood, a name rising from the ashes they buried me in. Zuri Adelina, daughter of flame and frost. The letter lit something inside me, but they must have smelled the smoke. That same night, I wandered the palace corridor, my heart pounding with a name that had just become mine. Then, I heard it. A whisper, not a prayer, a plan. Make it look like an accident, one of them said. The man who once bowed to my mother, General Varian, now plotted to bury her daughter. I turned too late. A blur of black cloaks, a blade flashed, an arrow sang past my ear. I ran, barefoot, breath shattering, heartbeat louder than my footsteps. They weren't trying to capture me, they were trying to erase me. The palace I once called home had become a maze of murder, and I was no longer a child lost in its halls. I was hunted, and for the first time, I realized hunted things learn to bite. I ran until the roads lost their names, until the language changed, until even the stars above me felt unfamiliar. The man who once saved me, Baba Dogo, left clues in whispers, and I followed them, across seas of sand and rivers of memory. Then I found it. The land they told me was savage, the father they said never existed, the kingdom I was never supposed to find. But there were no banners, no trumpets, just smoke, stone, silence. A ruined gate with no guards, walls broken by time and war, ashes where a crown once stood, and people who looked at me like I was a ghost wrapped in silk. They didn't see a daughter or a princess, they saw a curse. That day I realized I belonged nowhere, not to the land that birthed me, not to the land that broke me. And in that nowhere, something in me began to burn. I thought the worst had passed, that grief was the final wound. But the desert hides more than bones. They came at dusk, shadows without names, men who wore anger like armor, who traded lives for coins. They bound my hands, stripped me of dignity. I was no longer a secret, or a daughter, or even a person. I was a price. One rebel spat at my feet, said I was too pretty to last, said soft-skinned girls don't survive the markets. I looked him in the eye and smiled, because if death had come for me again, it would have to earn me this time. Among them was one who didn't speak, a warrior with eyes like dusk storms. He didn't look at me like prey, he looked at me like memory. But memories don't save you in chains. That night, tied in dirt, I whispered to the firelight, let them try. That night, I played the part they gave me, silent, broken, obedient. They fed me scraps like an animal. One laughed and said, she'll beg to be sold before dawn. But I wasn't waiting to be saved. The moment came when the cage opened. Two guards, loud with liquor and arrogance. One reached for me. I reached for his dagger. It happened fast, too fast for mercy. Steel in my hand, blood on my face, screams cutting through the campfire air. The man's eyes, wide red, empty. The other fled. I didn't chase him. I wasn't done looking at what I'd done. My first kill was not a victory. It was a funeral for the girl who waited. I stood, chest heaving, blade shaking in my fist. And in that moment, something inside me stopped breaking. It started building instead. Something harder, colder. The fire behind me burned like a crown. And I knew I'd never be bought again. Not with chains, not with love, not with lies. I was no one's child anymore. I was becoming my own myth. They say a queen is chosen by blood or by crown. But I was chosen by the broken. It started with whispers, the girl who fought back, the girl who killed her captor, the girl with no past, no place, but a fire that would not die. Widows found me. Runaways followed. Wounded soldiers swore loyalty without asking for names. We didn't look like a kingdom. We looked like what kingdoms leave behind. But I taught them to move in silence, to strike like ghosts, to take back the stolen. Slave chains snapped under our blades. Smoke from our raids curled into the night like prayer. They started calling me something I never asked for, the Shadow Queen. I wore no crown, I sat on no throne, but when I walked through the forest, barefoot and fierce, even the birds went quiet. Kale stood beside me, not as my guard, not as my lover, but as a witness to the rise of something the world had never seen. Not a queen of a palace, a queen of the forgotten, of rage, of mercy, of hearts. I never wanted revenge, but the world kept handing me matches and covering me in oil. The Western throne, once gilded in gold, now cracked and blackened with betrayal. The same generals who hunted me turned on each other. Blood soaked the marble they once walked with pride. And the East, my father's kingdom, already dust, left to rot by greed and forgotten honor. The people begged for hope, but found none. I stood between them, between the ghosts of what could have been and the ruins of what was. Kale whispered, "It's over." But nothing was over. Smoke curled through the sky like a crown with no wearer. And in the silence, I realized something. They never feared my power. They feared my survival. Because if I could live, after everything they did, it meant their power was never real. The empires fell that day, not by sword, but by the weight of their lies. I used to imagine this moment 1,000 different ways. Sometimes I screamed at her, sometimes I watched her beg. Sometimes I didn't recognize her at all. But when I saw her, shackled, fragile, small, I didn't feel fury. I felt the ache of a child still waiting to be held. Queen Isolde, no longer robed in power, looked up at me not as a mother, but as a woman who made too many wrong choices. "I never stopped thinking of you," she whispered. But she had. The day she chose silence over truth. The day she let the council turn my cradle into a coffin. And still, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't curse her or forgive her. I only looked into her eyes and walked away. Some wounds never close, some mothers are never mothers, and some daughters grow their wings in places where they were left to die. They thought the throne would define me, that I was born to inherit something old, crumbling, poisoned by greed. But I was never meant to sit where kings had lied and queens had bled. I was meant to walk where the broken stood and raise them. So I built no palace, I wore no crown, but the people still called me queen, not because I ruled them, but because I fought beside them. The widows, the orphans, the wanderers, they became my court. The forest, my kingdom. My banner was stitched in fire, my throne carved from survival. And when the wind carried petals across the valley that day, I knew. This was not the end of a story. It was the beginning of a legend. Zuri Adelina. They still whisper my name. The girl they tried to erase, who became the Queen of Hearts.